Hello my sweet friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we are going to be talking about fall book recommendations, but not just any fall book recommendations video. We are going to be talking about book recommendations from every genre. If you guys know me, then you know that I am constantly jumping around switching genres, and we don't gatekeep here, okay? So I'm going to be talking about the best books from every genre that I think you guys should read in the fall time. And more specifically, we are going to be talking about fantasy, sci-fi, romance, classics, fiction, and nonfiction. I'm not a huge mystery thriller person, and I've only read like 6 maybe. And so I've already talked about them all at some point on my channel, so I just decided not to include that category. And without further ado, let's just jump into the book recommendations. Now, I always say this in my book recommendations video, please feel free to jump around if you are not a romance person or a classics person. Just skip it, find the sections that you're looking for, and I'm so excited. We're going to start out with fantasy. The first book that I want to recommend to you guys is A Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. This book is the epitome of a perfect, cozy fall fantasy read. We're following our main character, Elizabeth, who has grown up in a magical library, and in this world, books have the potential, or I should say grimoires, the spell books, have the potential to transform into dangerous magical creatures. And at the beginning of our story, Elizabeth gets accused of a crime that she didn't commit, so she has to go on this journey to prove her innocence, and it is so full of magical creatures. The ambiance is so wonderful. I mean, a magical library with magical spell books in the fall time, it's a yes from me. Then the next book that I want to recommend is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This book I read a few years ago, but it has really stuck with me as a perfect book to read in the fall time. We are following this magical circus, and at the heart of this circus and the heart of our story are these 2 magicians who from birth, since birth, have been raised to complete a certain magical task. And all I will say is this story, the descriptions are so beautiful, so magical, so atmospheric, and there are a lot of moments where the things that our author is describing and sharing with us, my brain, oh my god, it was so beautiful. I just love the way that our author was able to create such a beautiful place and world. I will say this isn't the most action-packed fantasy story, so if that's not your thing, maybe don't pick this one up, but it is perfect for the cozy fall season. Then the next series that I have to recommend to you guys, I don't know if it's because I read this series in the fall time last year, but ever since then, and the fall time has come around, it feels wrong that I'm not reading these right now. I would highly recommend reading the Once Upon a Broken Heart trilogy in the fall time. In this world, we're following our main character. Her name is Evangeline Fox, and the love of her life is engaged to somebody else. He's like getting married. She's like, excuse me, you belong with me, little Taylor Swift moment. And so she goes and makes a deal with the Prince of Hearts. And let's just say it turns out you're not really supposed to make deals with fates, because there's always a catch. There's always a catch. And so she goes on this journey with Jax, our Prince of Hearts, throughout this trilogy, and it is very fairy tale-esque to me. There are a lot of magical creatures in this book. I mean, we're talking vampires, little mini dragons who sit on mushrooms. There's magical items. Like, it is just so full of all these little like trinkets and characters that are just so perfect, in my opinion, for the fall time. And yeah, I think it's probably because I read this series in the fall, but I really did enjoy these. And if you're looking for, again, a very atmospheric and fun YA fantasy series, I mean, it's right here. Then lastly, but certainly not least, for the fantasy category, I had to recommend the Throne of Glass series. To me, this is so perfect to read in the fall time. In this world, I'm sure you guys are familiar with this series, so I'm not going to sound like a broken record, but basically this series follows a world-famous assassin named Selena Sardothian, who at the beginning of our story gets selected to compete in these trials to ultimately become the king's champion. And we follow her throughout these trials, but as she's there, she's realizing that something just isn't right. So there's a very magical, mysterious element that runs through not only this story, but the entire series. And if you want something that's really gonna capture your attention, take you out of the present moment, and just transport you to a completely different world, I would highly recommend this series. I am not finished with it yet. I'm currently on the tandem read. It's wonderful to read in the fall time. Now we're going to be talking about sci-fi, and sci-fi, again, I feel like is such a wonderful genre to pick up in the fall time. I feel like a lot of times we're looking at stories that are a little bit more bleak, and I really enjoy sci-fi in the fall. I don't pick it up throughout most of the year. I feel like the main time that I do read sci-fi is in the fall, and the first book that I want to recommend to you guys is actually a recent read for me, and that would be Red Rising by Pierce Brown. In this book, we are following Darrow, who is a teenage miner living on Mars. And in this dystopian world, everything, or I guess I should say everyone, has been broken up into different castes, and reds are the lowest class, hence our title Red Rising, the reds in this world, and golds are the highest, and then there are different colors for all of the castes in between. And as I said before, Darrow is a red. He is working hard on Mars, essentially trying to develop the planet so it is habitable for more people to come and live on it. And a lot of people ultimately describe this book as Hunger Games on Mars, and I kind of see that connection. Like, there are similarities, so if that catches your attention, maybe pick this book up, but I don't feel like that's the whole point of this story. But it definitely does ultimately become this very action-packed and somewhat violent story, and I did feel like reading it in the fall or the winter time was the best time to pick it up. So if you guys haven't started this series yet, I would recommend it. Then the next sci-fi book that I would like to recommend is All That's Left in the World by Eric Brown. In this science fiction story, it is a YA, honestly the genres here, there's a lot of them. It's YA, queer, romance, science fiction, there's a lot going on, but honestly, I really enjoyed it. And in this book, we are in a world where this really catastrophic pathogen has killed almost everyone on planet Earth, and very few people are left on the planet. And we're following two young boys named Andrew and Jamie, and they are not only trying to figure out how to survive on this like new planet essentially, because like everyone that they know and care about has passed away from this disease, but also they're navigating a romance that emerges between the two of them. So it's kind of like finding love in this, I want to say post-apocalyptic, but like I don't know if that's right, story. And it's a series. I've only read the first book so far. The second book came out a little bit earlier this year. And if you're looking for kind of a dip your toes into sci-fi, this one is really easy to read. The characters are really enjoyable, and yeah, I would highly recommend this one. It's not necessarily a very fall book, but it's a good one, and I just wanted to recommend it. Then the third and final sci-fi book that I wanted to recommend for this video is The Three-Body Problem by, I think you say it Liu Cixin. I'm not 100% sure about that, so let me know in the comments if I have messed that up. But this book actually just got turned into a Netflix TV series. So if you guys have heard about that, it's actually based on this series. This is a trilogy. And in this world, it basically starts out as this attack on science. And so all of these very famous, intelligent scientists start dying or they're committing suicide, and people don't really understand why. And it becomes a very interesting story where you have this group of scientists who are trying to, I don't know if solve a mystery is the right way to say that, but there's a lot of unexplainable things going on. And if you guys like Ready Player One and this video game element that Ready Player One has, this book also has that as a strong role. And that's all that I'm gonna say. That might sound kind of weird, but trust me, this book is so good. A little confusing, a little bit hard to get into, but once you get into it, it's really, really wonderful. And the reason that I'm recommending this book for the fall time is it feels very like academic. You have a lot of very intelligent people who are working in academia. And to me, I just really associate that like academia, the start of the school year, which again, it's not like the school year, but you just have these very intelligent professionals. I associate that with the fall time a lot. So highly recommend if you guys haven't checked out this series before. Now we're gonna switch over into classics, and I think the fall time is a perfect time to pick up classics. I've said this before in a previous video, but I don't really see myself picking up classics at the peak of summer, you know? I mean, I do, but like not that many. I read a lot more of them in the fall and winter time. And the first one that I would like to recommend to you guys for the fall season is The House of Mirth by Edith Wharton. I also read this book very, very recently, and I really, really enjoyed it. We are following our main character. Her name is Lily Bard. It takes place in the early 20th century. And the simplest way to say it is she is on the hunt for a husband, but not only a husband. She doesn't just need a man. She wants a rich man, okay? And we follow very closely this story, this like character study of Lily Bart as she navigates this world that has so much societal pressure. There's so much pressure put on her. Wealth and money is truly your ticket to everything that you do in this society. And I felt like it was a really interesting exploration of her and her character and this time period. And at the end of the day, I would say that Edith Wharton is a character artist. I feel like that's what I've learned from the books of hers that I've read so far. She does a really great job writing very layered and complex characters. And the reason that I would recommend this during the fall time is at the beginning of the story, we're starting out in September, and I read this book in September. And so I don't know, it just felt so perfectly aligned with the fall season, especially at the beginning of the story. I'm pretty sure this book goes throughout 2 years, but it just feels very fall to me. And so I feel like this is the best time of year to pick up this book. I'll be right back. I have forgotten one book. Totally forgot. I recommended this book to my boyfriend, and so it wasn't on my bookshelf, so I didn't grab it. But the next classic that I have to recommend you guys that was quite literally made for the fall time is The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. I read this book in the fall time last year, and my best friend gifted me this book, and she told me, she's like, Olivia, you have to read this during the fall. If you guys have seen the films, it is like somewhat similar, but we are following a little hobbit named Frodo Baggins who lives in the Shire, and he, you know, hobbits don't really like crazy adventures, okay? They just like to eat and drink and be cozy and do stuff at home, okay? But Frodo, after a series of events, ends up on this journey to go and destroy this all-powerful ring. And he meets a lot of fun companions along the way. And so this is the first book in the series. And I mean, there are descriptions of the leaves changing colors, the leaves falling off the trees. You feel the time passing as they're making their way through this journey. And yeah, I don't really know what else to say about this because you probably know at least something about this book. And I really do believe that it was made for the fall time. Okay, this last book for the classics category, I was not sure if I should recommend it in this video because it is my current read. So technically I haven't finished it yet, but I'm definitely going to, and it is giving all of the fall spooky classics vibes. And that book is Dracula by none other than Bram Stoker. This is the original story of Count Dracula, the story that made vampires famous the way that they are today. And it is perfect for the fall season, specifically for Halloween, October spooky season. It is a gothic horror novel where we are following this young professional who for a business trip goes to Transylvania to stay with the Count Dracula, but he doesn't know that the Count is a vampire. And it's written through journal entries. There are multiple POVs in this story, and it is so spooky. And guys, I'm loving it. You can tell I am loving this book so far. I am filming a reading vlog, so you're gonna see more of my opinions on that later in the month, but it is wonderful for the fall time. And even though I haven't finished this book yet, it felt like I should throw it into this video. Like I had to. So the next category that we're gonna be talking about in this video is romance. And while I personally associate romance with the summertime or the springtime, there are definitely some romances that I have read that hit so hard in the fall time. And the first book that I want to recommend to you guys for this fall season is a novel love story by Ashley Poston. This book is perfect for the fall. I read this in the summertime still, like it wasn't quite fall yet when I read this, but I should have waited. I should have read this in the fall time because we are following our main character. Her name is Eileen, and she ends up getting trapped in her favorite romance book. Can we just take a second for that? Yeah, she gets stuck in her favorite small town romance series, and this book is the epitome of cozy. There are these noon rainstorms every single day when the rain rolls in, and there are these sweet small town characters, and everything about this book felt like a fall romance read. It's very slow paced, it's very cozy, there's not a ton of wild major plot points, and Ashley Poston's writing for me is just absolutely top tier. I love the way that she can tell a story, describe a scene, evoke emotion out of our characters. And while this isn't my favorite book that she's read, I definitely still really enjoyed it, and it is perfect for the fall season. While we're on the subject of Ashley Poston, I figured I might as well also talk about one of my favorite books by this author, The Dead Romantics. And in this book, we are following a ghostwriter named Florence Day who writes books for a romance author. But problem is, our main character, Florence, she's lost all hope, all faith in love. She thinks it's fake, which is a problem, again, because she is a romance author. And funny thing about Florence, she may or may not be able to see ghosts. Yeah, yes. And it ends up being a very, very spooky, cozy romance story. There are like ghosts and crows and just like, graveyards, like all of the cozy, spooky things. I ended up really, really loving this book. I had known about its existence for years, but for some reason I never really wanted to pick it up. And then my best friend and I did a book club reading this together. Loved it so much, and I am so glad that I read it in October because it's the perfect time to pick it up. So honestly, both of these Ashley Poston books, you cannot go wrong. Pick them up in the fall. They're wonderful. Then the next romance, it's like romance literary fiction book, but I love it. I know not everybody does, but I just had to throw it into this video because I feel like the fall is the perfect time to read this book, and that is none other than Normal People by Sally Rooney. I love Sally Rooney. I said it. I loved this book so much. This is a 6-star read for me. And in this book, we are following Marianne and Connell, who start out as kids in high school. Their families are connected to each other in a way that I won't say. All that I will say is there is definitely a like wealth disparity between the two families. And so one of them is more well off than the other, and that has some impacts on who they are, how they feel about each other, their relationship to each other. Ultimately, we follow them as they go to college, and each of our characters undergo a lot of transformation between when they're in high school and when they're in college. And I just felt like Sally Rooney was able to create and tell such a wonderful story. And the reason that I'm recommending this for fall time is we're looking at these characters when they're in school, like in high school, in college, and for some reason, anything academic, I said this before about the 3-body problem, anything academic to me just feels like a fall read. I don't know exactly why that is. It's probably got to be that school starts in the fall time. So since we're with our characters while they're in high school, while they're in college, it just feels like the right time of year to pick this up. And I would love to reread this book this fall. Then the last book that I want to just throw into this romance category is The Ex-Hex by Erin Sterling. If you are looking to get in the witchy, spooky, cozy Halloween spirit, but also read about a fun little romance, why haven't you picked this book up yet? I don't know. This book I either read 2 or maybe even 3 years ago. It's been a while since I picked this one up. But we are following Vivian, who is a witch, and she's heartbroken. And, you know, just as a fun little joke, she casts a fake curse on her ex-boyfriend. The curse wasn't actually fake. The curse goes through, she just doesn't know that it did. And so 9 years later, she, you know, runs into this ex, and turns out the curse was real. Yeah, and so they have to go on this little fun adventure to break the curse. And the town that this book takes place in is literally like Halloween Town meets Gilmore Girls. It is so fun, so cozy, perfect for Halloween, and if that doesn't convince you, I don't know what will. I really don't know what will. Now we're switching over into fiction, and so for the fiction book recommendations, the first one that I have to talk about is none other than Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. I talk about this book a lot on my channel, so I'm not going to get into it too deeply here, but basically in this story, we are following an author named June Hayward, who at the very beginning of this story, her author friend passes away. And not only does her friend pass away, she goes and steals her friend's manuscript and then publishes it in her own name. Yeah, she did that. And I felt like the reason that this was a good book to recommend in the fall time is this is definitely a speculative fiction story. There is a lot of interesting criticism that goes on in here about the publishing industry. And in addition to that, there is a very, very intriguing mystery element that emerges that I wasn't expecting when I picked up this book. And because of that, I felt like I was kind of on the edge of my seat. It was a little spooky, a little bit eerie. And I don't know, I just think this would be a wonderful book to read in the fall time. And if you're not a big fiction person, do not fear, because this book is so easy to read, so easy to fly through. It's a great one for the fall. The next book that I have to talk about is one of my favorites, and that is Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. And this book is a retelling of Shakespeare's life, but it doesn't actually center around Shakespeare. Rather, it centers around his wife and his children. Something that I didn't realize before picking up this book is it takes place during the bubonic plague, which actually, I mean, of course, it had a huge impact on the region at the time, but it also had a lot of impacts on Shakespeare's family. And so we look at that story more specifically, again, Shakespeare's family, not so much Shakespeare himself. And I found it to be a very beautiful and whimsical story that really, really, I think would hit so hard in the fall time. So if you've been thinking about picking this one up, I feel like now is the perfect time of year to do it. Then the third and final book that I'm going to be recommending for the fiction category is one that I'm not sure I've ever talked about on my channel before. I read it in college, so a little while ago now, and that book is Lincoln on the Bardo. I think it's by George Saunders, but I'm not 100% right. So whatever it says on the book cover is the correct author for this book. And this book is set during the Civil War. We are following President Abraham Lincoln after he has lost his son, Willie. And this book, the way that it's written, the structure of it is very, very unique. It's unlike anything I've ever read before. I don't know if I want to say exactly what that is. I feel like experiencing it for yourself is the best way to do it. I don't want to spoil anything. The reason that I think Lincoln on the Bardo is a really wonderful story to pick up during the fall time is when his son Willie passes, he ends up getting stuck between realms, I guess is the best way to say that. Like, he's kind of in this purgatory space where he can't pass on to the beyond because there's a lot of unresolved things between Lincoln and his son. I mean, Lincoln is heartbroken. Like, he is just absolutely crushed by this loss, which makes perfect sense. I won't even get into it. It's a heartbreaking story. A little bit difficult to follow, but there is this huge focus on the spirits, the people who have passed, and the presence and description of those characters in this book, to me, made it very, very perfect for the fall season. Then lastly, I did want to do a few nonfiction book recommendations in this video. Now, of course, nonfiction is just fact, so there is not a good seasonal time to read these books. I feel like for me, they have been really great to either read in the fall or would be great to read in the fall. But again, nonfiction is nonfiction. You can pick these up at any time of year. I just feel like now is a fun time to pick up these books. And the first book that I would like to recommend to you all is Educated by Tara Westover. This is a memoir about Tara Westover where we're looking at her. She was raised in rural Idaho, and this memoir sheds light on her path to finding education and academia in the town that she was raised in and her family's circumstances. She wasn't exposed to a lot of education. She was exposed to a lot of other very extreme ideas. Again, I don't want to say what those are until you read this book. And And it is in so many ways heartbreaking, but also in so many other ways heartwarming to see how far Tara Westover was able to go and how much she was able to accomplish given the tools that she had when she was so young. Like, I just find her and her story so impressive, and it's just such a beautiful thing to read about. And again, same thing, educated, we're looking at the story of finding education. There's a lot of references to academia and her experience becoming more acquainted with school and college and life after college. And I've said it enough times, but I really associate that with the fall season, so I think this would be great to read in the fall time. Then the next nonfiction book that I would like to recommend for the fall season is Killers of the Flower Moon by David Grann. This is actually a narrative nonfiction story, so it's written sort of like a fiction book would be written. However, everything on the page is fact. So David Grann did extensive research, so his writing sounds like we're looking at a bunch of characters, but really it's a bunch of real people, which I was just so baffled by because I did not know that when I picked this book up. And this book basically follows the murders of the Osage Indians that happened in, I think, Oklahoma in America in the 1920s. And long story short, no spoilers, but the Osage Indians, their tribe was being moved around constantly by the US government. And so where their reservation ended up being in Oklahoma, it was later learned that they were sitting on these oil reserves that made the Osage Indians some of the richest people in America. And unfortunately, during this time, Osage Indians started dying. People didn't know why, people didn't know how, people didn't know who was killing them. And it looks at these murders and the like mystery that was going on, who was killing these people, but at the same time the emergence of the FBI and how this case contributed to the growth of the FBI. And I feel like because of the nature of the story and, you know, us as the reader trying to figure out what happened as David Grann is telling the story, it feels similar to a mystery or a thriller, but it's all true and real. So yeah, it just seemed like a good nonfiction to recommend for the fall time. Then the last book that I wanted to recommend in this video is Neurologic by, again, I'm not quite sure how to say the author's name, so just by the author that's on the book title. And this book is honestly one of my favorite nonfiction books I have read to date. It looks at the human brain, and more specifically these instances when the human brain diverges from what we consider to be neurotypical. There are a lot of different case studies, a lot of different research experiments that we look at in this book, and I just felt like it was a really interesting exploration of the human mind. And like, there are things, I still remember certain chapter names from this book. Like, that is how much this has stuck with me. And the reason that I feel like this is such a wonderful nonfiction book to read in the fall time is we are looking at these instances or these cases or these diagnoses where, again, the human mind is diverging from what many of us consider to be normal or average. And I felt like it opened my mind to different things that the human brain does, different ways that other people can experience the world. And there were just so many things that I was so surprised by about the human mind. Basically, I just really enjoyed this nonfiction book, and I don't really have a lot of opportunities to talk about it. So this is me talking about it. I think those are all of the fall book recommendations that I have for you guys in this video. I hope you found a new book or a few new books from different genres that you feel excited about reading this fall season. Let me know in the comment section what is on your fall TBR, and also comment down below the orange heart emoji so I know who made it all the way to the end. As always, I'm so grateful for each and every one of you, and I think that's it from me. I hope you guys are having a great day and a great reading month, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!